Today, I'm going to be telling you 3 different stories about people who set off into the wilderness to go for a simple hike, but then were never seen again, dead or alive. All 3 of these hikers disappeared in U.S. national parks, and to this day, none of their cases have ever been solved. Taking place from the depths of the Grand Canyon all the way to the alpine lakes of Yosemite, I want as many people as possible to hear these stories, and that's for 2 reasons. Number 1 is so that future hikers can learn from these stories and stay out of danger, and number 2 is so that the missing hikers have a greater chance of someday being found. So to start off, I invite you on a virtual trip to one of the most beautiful and also dangerous places in all of America, the Grand Canyon. Now, this trip is free, but you must hit the subscribe button right now to cover admission, especially if you're a repeat viewer and you haven't subscribed yet. All right, let's go to the Grand Canyon. On Friday, June 17th, 2016, Floyd Roberts III, his friend Ned Bryant, and Bryant's daughter set out for a 9-day backpacking trip in the Grand Canyon. Roberts and Bryant were longtime hiking partners. In 1992, they actually took their first trip together to Grand Canyon National Park, and they would end up coming back several times over the next 24 years. The 2 men had met each other at age 10 living in New Jersey, and eventually Roberts went on to live in Huntsville, Alabama, where he worked for a while for NASA, of all places. And at the time of the hike in question, he was living in Florida teaching computer programming and game design at a middle school. So, I mean, he worked for NASA, he's teaching programming. Clearly, Roberts was a smart man, and he was also a fairly experienced backpacker, again, clearly due to all the experience he had in the Grand Canyon. And these 2 things make the circumstances that surround his disappearance all the more bizarre, as you're about to find out. On day 1 of their backpacking trip, the group hiked out into extreme heat conditions. Roberts was wearing a red long-sleeved shirt, blue denim jeans, Nike free sneakers, and a large blue backpack. Not exactly ideal clothing, especially the jeans, to wear during a heat wave while doing strenuous exercise, I will say. Around 4:45 in the afternoon, the group made a decision that probably seemed quite routine at the time, but would soon prove to be an absolute disaster. There was a small hill standing in the group's way, one that was estimated to only take about 30 minutes to climb over. For reasons that are unknown to me, the group decided to split up. Brian and his daughter wanted to climb over the hill, and Roberts wanted to go around it. And so that's what they did. The Bryants made steady progress up the hill, and they expected to see Roberts waiting for them on the other side because they had taken the harder route after all. But much to their confusion and later dismay, when they got over and down the other side of the hill, Roberts wasn't there. The Bryants waited for him and waited for him, but eventually they got anxious and they began searching. Roberts still hadn't showed up. They searched and found nothing, and eventually decided to actually double back towards where the group had made the split, and eventually they just had to make camp. They even went as far as displaying their colorful sleeping bags out in the open around their campsite, hoping that Roberts would spot them. But by morning, Roberts still hadn't showed up, and the Bryants knew at this point the only thing that they could do was to report him missing. They found some cell service, and they did just that. And soon after, the National Park Service launched an extensive search using helicopters, dogs, and ground search teams. It was a massive effort, but despite that, Roberts was not found. Floyd Roberts was last seen near Kelly Tanks heading towards Trail Canyon or 214 Mile Canyon in the Shanley Springs area, though it's possible he instead descended into the 209 Mile Canyon. He was last seen carrying 2 gallons of water, a week's worth of food, and a map of the hiking group's planned route. No trace of Roberts, his gear, or anything related to his disappearance has ever been found. There's no solid leads into what happened. Perhaps he just succumbed to the elements. I mean, it does seem plausible given the extreme heat, but honestly, the truth is, we don't really know what happened. But regardless of the circumstances in this case, I do want you all to understand that you should never, ever underestimate the dangers of heat stroke while you're hiking. I always try to highlight the lessons that we can learn from the stories I cover on this channel, and it's actually for that reason that I'd like to thank this video's sponsor, BetterHelp. Their support is making it possible for me to bring you these stories and to bring you these lessons. Now, let me ask you, is there something out there that's preventing you from feeling fulfilled or maybe preventing you from achieving your goals in life? If so, it could be beneficial for you to consider therapy, which is way easier said than done, by the way. I'm sure by now that most of you know that therapy can be incredibly beneficial for one's mental health, so I'm not gonna harp on that point, but the problem that I see with therapy is that getting started with it is very, very daunting. There may not be many therapists in your area, and going in for a face-to-face meeting to talk about your problems and your issues is quite intimidating, to put it mildly. It's not really something that I think a lot of people feel comfortable doing. However, I really like BetterHelp because it solves all of these problems and it makes getting therapy easier than ever before. And that's because BetterHelp is online therapy, so there's no face-to-face meetings, and you can even customize the level of interaction that you'd like with your therapist. If you want something a little more intimate, you can do a video call, like a Skype call kind of thing, and if you want less than that, you can do voice. You can even do just instant messaging, basically texting, if that's what you're most comfortable with. The way that BetterHelp is designed brings you all the benefits of therapy without the intimidating start that holds so many people back. Another problem with therapy is that finding the right therapist can be a huge pain. I mean, you have to try different people out in person. You have to deal with insurance and insurance networks. If you don't like your therapist, then you have to deal with it all over again. BetterHelp has over 30,000 licensed therapists in their network, and so if you're matched with a therapist that doesn't feel like a good fit, you can easily switch to somebody else, just a couple clicks of a button, no questions asked, and no extra cost. Click that link in the description or head to betterhelp.com/KyleHatesHiking. You'll get 10% off your first month, and clicking that link also helps massively support this channel. And with that said, for our next story, let's head to Yosemite National Park. On June 15th, 2005, Michael Fissery was on a solo backpacking trip in Yosemite National Park when something went horribly wrong. Unfortunately, we don't know what. The 51-year-old California native was described as, quote, an off-the-grid kind of guy, and he was very outdoorsy. It was reported that Fissery would actually cycle to his job at the post office every day, and that he was a very experienced hiker and backpacker. One of the places that Fissery had frequented on his numerous backpacking trips was Hetch Hetchy Reservoir. Though remote and rugged, he knew the area very well. And that makes the events that transpired in June of 2005 even more bizarre than they would have otherwise been. The details are a little bit confusing to me, to be honest, but I'm pretty sure Fissery's plan was to start at the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir and then do some sort of loop near Till Mountain, around towards Lake Vernon, and then back to the reservoir, back to his car. It's unclear to me if his original plan had him traveling up the Till Valley or not, but that's evidently where he ended up, perhaps temporarily, or perhaps permanently. The last known sighting of Fissery placed him at Hetch Hetchy. He then began hiking north towards Till Mountain on a trail that eventually intersects with the Pacific Crest Trail, but after he left the reservoir, he was never seen again. Though Hetch Hetchy is a fairly popular area, once hikers leave the reservoir, which has a road to it, they're going straight into an extremely remote and inaccessible area. On June 21st, Fissery's family alerted the Park Service that he had not returned home. His backcountry permit had expired, and he was supposed to have been home by then, so his family knew that something must have gone wrong. Fissery's car was found in the parking lot for the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir, but there was no sign of him there other than that. Though Fissery's family was certainly scared, they had not given up hope yet that he would be found alive. And that's because, incredibly, on a previous solo backpacking trip in Yellowstone National Park, Fissery had actually broken his ankle and ended up crawling back to civilization, making a successful self-rescue effort. Absolutely incredible. And because of this, I imagine his family was probably holding out hope, thinking that if he had been able to survive that previous time, he certainly had what it takes to survive this time as well. Officials searched all around the reservoir and all of the trails in the surrounding area, even all the way up to the Pacific Crest Trail, but initially, they found no sign of Fissery. However, this would soon change when they discovered a very important clue near Till Mountain. Officials discovered Michael Fissery's backpack, his water bottle, his camera, and a topographical map, and they found it just off the trail near the snow line on the east side of the mountain. I'm sure this discovery brought a lot of hope to the searchers and certainly to Fissery's family, but this hope would soon be gone as the search dragged on and no additional clues, let alone Fissery himself, were discovered. Eventually, the discovery of the backpack and the other gear would not bring hope, but it would actually crush it, as Fissery's friends insisted that he would never have left his backpack somewhere behind and just hiked off somewhere else. To this day, nobody knows what happened to Michael Fissery or why his backpack and some of his gear was left abandoned. As a hiker myself, I will say that it's not unheard of for people to drop their packs temporarily while taking a side trail up to a peak, and then they come back and gather their stuff. So I don't know, it's possible that Fissery did this and then had some sort of accident while he was away from his gear. I don't really know. There were massive searches for Michael Fissery, so it's not like he hasn't been found due to lack of effort. Searchers were called in from 5 different counties, multiple aircraft was used, cadaver dogs were used, and they failed to pick up any scents, and the Marines were even enlisted to help with the search. The Park Service reportedly spent almost $500,000 looking for Michael Fissery, and yet they still came up empty-handed. The hard truth is that we don't know and may never know the full story of his last hike. It's almost as though the mountains simply swallowed him whole. He wasn't the first, and he definitely wasn't the last, because 14 years later, the mountains would swallow another hiker whole, this time in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. For most visitors to Rocky Mountain National Park, summer is the ideal season. This makes total sense, right? The weather is much milder, which makes it easier to enjoy some of the best scenery that Colorado has to offer. For some folks, however, winter is actually the more ideal time to visit, and the harshness of the cold and the snow just adds to the charm. Presumably, this is how 70-year-old James Puit felt. Puit was on his 3rd annual visit to Rocky Mountain National Park, and so far, all 3 visits had been during the winter months. Puit was from Tennessee, and so it makes sense that he in particular might enjoy the winter scenery more than others, because it was just much different than what he was used to in the South. Now, Puit was not keeping his family in the loop on his specific plans, but they did know that he arrived in the area on February 22nd, 2019. It's unclear to me what he spent the first few days of his trip doing, but one thing is crystal clear. On Thursday, February 28th, Puit set out on a hike, and then he was never seen again. Since his family wasn't keeping close tabs on him, a few days actually went by before anyone realized that Puit was missing. Then, on March 3rd, patrolling rangers noticed that a car had been parked overnight at the Glacier Gorge trailhead located in the central part of the park. Now, this is a national park after all, so it's perfectly normal for hikers to leave their cars overnight. But the park rangers grew suspicious and also worried because they realized there was no backcountry permit associated with this particular car. This suggested that whoever parked the car there either did it illegally or, more likely, didn't intend to spend the night outside. They ran the car's plates, and they realized that it belonged to James Puit. The Park Service started their investigation by contacting Pruitt's family, And this is how they learned that the last time anyone had heard from him was on the morning of February 28th around 10 a.m. They also learned that Puit was only planning a day hike and was not planning to stay overnight in the backcountry. And this lined up with the fact that he never received a backcountry permit from the Park Service. Investigators were soon able to place him at the Safeway in Estes Park, Colorado. I think that's how you say that. At 9:28 a.m. when an image of him leaving the store was captured by the security camera. This, unfortunately, would prove to be James Pruitt's last photo. After leaving Safeway, it's assumed that Puit entered the national park, drove to Glacier Gorge, and then vanished somewhere out in the backcountry. Nobody knows what his intended destination was on his day hike, which left searchers a lot of ground to cover. And to make matters worse, storms had dropped more than 2 feet of snow in the area between the time that Puit went missing and the time that the search was started. Active searching took place from the day Pruitt's car was found, March 3rd, all the way through March 9th. A search perimeter was set up which encompassed approximately 15 square miles of terrain, and searchers were concentrated near the Glacier Gorge trailhead, Chaos Creek, Mills Lake, among a few other potential destinations that Puit could have been trying to hike to. The searchers were reportedly trudging through chest-deep snow when they went off trail, and it was just a grueling, really difficult search. And it was also a large effort. Dogs were used, aircraft was used, and they searched tirelessly for nearly a week. Eventually, though, the search was scaled back, though limited search efforts continued through the summer and fall of 2019. But no clues were ever found about what happened to James Puit. Absolutely nothing. No body, no gear, not even any tracks. Now, Puit may have been wearing a blue jacket, a red or orange hat, and microspikes on his boots when he went missing. His story is certainly concerning, but in my opinion, it kind of makes sense how someone could go missing while solo hiking in the winter. Puit's disappearance, it just doesn't really strike me as super suspicious, though it is sad. This next disappearance, however, is definitely suspicious in my opinion. I would even say it's probably one of the most suspicious disappearances in national park history. Now you might be thinking, I thought there was only gonna be 3 stories in this video. That's right, I only promised you 3, but I'm actually gonna throw in a bonus 4th as an enticement to please hit the subscribe button. On July 25th, 1981, a group from Saratoga, California headed up to Yosemite National Park for a horse riding and hiking trip. The group consisted of 14-year-old Stacy Arz, her father George, an older man named Gerald Stewart, and several others. And by the way, I'm not exactly sure of the way to pronounce it. I don't know if it's Arez, I'm sorry. The location of their trip was the Sunrise Meadows area of Yosemite National Park, which, just for the record, is not that far away from Hetch Hetchy Reservoir, where Michael Fissery went missing. The group rode in on their horses for a few hours, and eventually they arrived at Sunrise High Sierra Camp, which was where they were planning on spending the night. There were some limited accommodations at this camp, including cabins and some showers, which the group quickly took advantage of after they arrived. After showering, Stacy told her father that she wanted to go for a short hike around the area in order to photograph the scenery and stretch her legs. She invited her dad to tag along, but for some reason he declined. He did, however, suggest to her that she should change out of her flip-flops and put on her hiking boots, which were obviously much more suited for the terrain. Unfortunately, this would end up being the last conversation that George Arez would ever have with his daughter. Now, instead of her dad coming along, Stacy actually found another hiking companion in 77-year-old Gerald Stewart, who had ridden in with the group that day. It's unclear to me exactly where the two were planning on hiking, but either way, it wasn't supposed to be very far. There was a flooded meadow a few hundred yards away from Sunrise High Sierra Camp, and there was also a 1.5 mile long trail to Sunrise Lakes. The two set off, and it wasn't long before Stewart realized that he wasn't going to be able to keep up. He was in his late 70s after all. And so he sat down and Stacy continued on without him. Again, they weren't planning on going very far, and it's for this reason that nobody made any attempt to stop Stacy. She quickly disappeared from Stuart's sight, though one other member of the party was back at the campsite and apparently off in the distance. He actually had eyes on Stacy for a little bit longer than Stuart, and this person supposedly saw Stacy standing on a rock that was roughly 50 yards south of the trail, and that was the last time that she was ever seen. Eventually, Gerald Stewart, George Arz, and the rest of the group became concerned and started searching for Stacy, but they didn't find her. I did see one source that stated that while Stewart was resting, he spoke with a group of people hiking the opposite way, and this group reported that they did not see Stacy, but I'm not exactly sure if this is true. The Park Service sprung into action as soon as Stacy was reported missing. They had well over 100 people searching the backcountry, including specialized climbers who were covering the more dangerous, hard to get to parts of the terrain, and they also had multiple helicopters and cadaver dogs. The only clue that all of this searching produced was Stacy's lens cap, which was found nearby one of the lakes not far from where she was last seen. To this day, over 40 years later, no other sign of Stacy has ever been found. Now, in my opinion, this disappearance is quite suspicious, and that's because unlike some of the other ones I've covered in this video, there was no bad weather, she wasn't really hiking alone either, and she wasn't hiking very far from where her camp was. Some people will suggest that Gerald Stewart may have killed her, but keep in mind, again, this guy was 77 years old. It would have been very difficult for him to kill her and then quickly hide her body and also hide it so close to where they were camped and where they would obviously search. It's also been reported that Stacy was having some family trouble and maybe some trouble with her boyfriend back home. And so maybe she ran off intentionally, but I don't really see that as a likely possibility either, because if that was the case, why did she originally try to hike off in her flip-flops before her dad made her change her shoes? And also, speaking of her dad, why would she have invited her dad and Gerald Stewart to come with her if she was planning on running off? All of the disappearances in this video are bizarre, they're frustrating, and they're very sad. My heart goes out to the missing and their families, and also to all of the men and women who worked tirelessly to try and bring them home. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. I'm not gonna lie, my dream is to one day get this channel to 1 million subscribers. Now, I don't know if that's possible, that's very far off from now, but I'm sure as hell gonna try. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.